Gordon, what's Jaques?
Jaques is the character in As You Like It who says all the world's a stage, and so that was my little jokey nod to that.
And what is the other Jaques? Your newsletter.
Oh yes. My my newsletter is it focuses on. I have spent many years writing for Variety, looking at for Variety. I've mostly spent my time looking at New York theater, Broadway, off Broadway, also around the US as well. I've had a few opportunities to look at theater internationally at Variety, but I mainly think about uh, Broadway and musicals not just as creative products, but also as a business and how those two things interplay and interact. And so that is what I often end up doing in Jaques because I'm very interested to see the ways that both the creative mm, impulse to make musicals has spread around the world, and also the ways that the business is traveling around the world and how it's being changed by the encounters it has in all these other markets around the world.
Mhm. You enjoy it? I mean, some of my students know that making marquee is one of it's probably my favorite thing that I
Mm.
do. Do you enjoy Jaques?
Absolutely. It's the reason I it the way the newsletter came about was that I was sort of noticing that as particularly in the last 5 years, as the cost structures of Broadway just became, more and more hostile, and costs are going up, everything. It's harder and harder to figure out how to make a viable financial model for a show on Broadway. And so I was finding that more and more people were thinking basically from day one about the ways their shows could be could travel around the world as a way to kind of shore up the financial model that they were having trouble putting together based just on sort of the idea or proposed sort of United States success. So it was a trend that I was seeing, and nobody else was really writing about it, and I wanted to give myself a reason to write about it, and so that's what I ended up doing.
Now that's happened with Hollywood too, right?
Yeah.
Hollywood studios are thinking now much more than they did a generation ago. How are we going to make money in China?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And they go into some movies knowing that movie won't necessarily play very well in China, and that affects how they might budget that film.
Let's do a little tour.
Hmm.
Um, Pick three countries that you think are producing exciting new musical theater,
Mhm.
and tell me about them one by one.
Okay. I mean, I think the obvious one that everyone is going to guess will be Seoul, South Korea. It is. It has been. It has had this sort of thriving musical theater scene and theater scene for at least the last 10 years, more really, but it's really been started to get an international profile in the last 10 years. And it has the musical theater there runs the gamut from like giant Broadway imports to their own version of their own interpretation of a Broadway show. Like when I was got to be there last year for a musical theater conference there, and I saw their production of Frankenstein, which is a like so Korean in so many ways and thrilling, but clearly very inspired by those sort of grand historical kind of Les Mis epics. Jekyll and Hyde was clearly an influence on it as well. So like they've got these giant shows, and then they have this like packed kind of off Broadway, what we would consider a kind of off Broadway neighborhood. All these smaller theaters are clustered in a neighborhood, and that's actually where I saw maybe Happy Ending before it started in the US in this teeny tiny production in Seoul that made me realize that that show is going to do great as it goes around the world in whatever size production you see it in, because it works really well in a very intimate setting as opposed to this very large setting. Anyway, they are very ambitious. They're very excited about exporting their cultural stories through musical theater and doing it, they hope, with the same success that they've had with film, with movies like Parasite, and with music like BTS and TV shows like Squid Games, and maybe Happy Ending is sort of the first foray into finding real international success with musical theater.
Tell me
So I think
about
that's one of them.
Tell me about the money in South Korea. How does that work out? Who's investing? Who's paying?
It's mostly it's an interesting they the way we, do it on Broadway is, you raise a sort of lump sum of money that we call capitalization, and that sort of is the initial outlay for getting the production up and going. But then you have these weekly running costs on top of that that you have to sort of pay. You have to like pay those weekly running costs, and then whatever you make on top of that goes back to paying back the capitalization costs. And then once you sort of recoup all of that, then you start to make money as a Broadway producer. Runs are much shorter in South Korea. They tend to be planned for 3 or 4 months, in part because it's a smaller country and they do their shows in Korean almost always. With some exceptions, and so they tend to raise that money in one lump sum. Like they sort of just raise a chunk of money and that pays for all 4 months, including the running costs. It's a lot of raising money from corporations and sponsorships. And I find this in other parts of the world as well. It's the idea of a sort of individual investor, as we have here in the United States, is less common. And so it's a lot of raising money from other companies that might fund the show and then get a chunk of tickets to give to its employees, things like that. But that, as I understand it, is maybe starting to evolve as people start to see that you might be able to make some money in investing in a musical.
So a show written in Korean wins the Tony for Best Musical.
Yep.
Um, Les Miserables, the best parts were written by Herbert Kretzmer,
Mm,
right? The
mm,
lyrics, which it was show was written in French, and he was able to give us "Do You Hear the People Sing" from
mm.
a really boring French lyric.
That French is one of the few languages I know well enough that when I saw that Les Mis, that most recent Les Mis in French, I thought, oh, this song is not as good in French. Like it's not that it's boring, as you say. You're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, the history of it is they had this version. I'm sure you know this. I'm just telling
Mm,
the students. They had an original version with pretty lame lyrics.
mm,
Kressmer came along. Actually, a South African Jew came along. So he was neither British nor French. Came along, translated it into English, and his lyrics were so good that they retranslated the French
mm.
using his approach, and but they're still not as good
Yeah.
in French as his English is one. But tell me a little bit about the translation of maybe having ending. That would be interesting. What
That's a very unique case because it's written by a transnational creative team. Like Hugh
oh,
Park is Korean. He was born in Korea. He's lived in New York for years and years, but he is a Korean. And Will Abramson is an American. And
oh,
so they actually wrote the translation. They wrote it in Korean first, but then they also wrote the English language version. So that's very different from the idea of another writer coming in and translating, which has not happened to the same degree on Broadway. It happens the other way around all the time. It happens with, a show goes to play in Hamburg, for instance, and they get a team, one or two, or more than one or two German writers or lyricists or whatever together to translate the show.
right. And when it's Hamilton or something Sondheim, these things can be very difficult to pull off.
Yep.
um, and so important. And sometimes they can come up with an inspired choice. My favorite example, which some of my students have heard me say before, is bring him home in Hebrew instead of God on high.
Hmm.
They translated it to Elohai, which means my God.
Hmm.
They were
Mhm.
able to keep the sound and the meaning at the same time. It's a genius translation, and
Yeah.
those of you, those people in the audience who know both, it catches you, right? When that sort of thing happens.
One of my favorite editions of my newsletter was this roundtable with these translators from around the world, and it was just fascinating to see every language poses a different challenge in terms of how you figure out how to make it work. And many of them had done things like translate Sondheim, and like how the heck do you do that in Korean? It's fascinating.
Yeah. So your second country.
I would say Spain, Madrid. in Spain. I think Hamburg is sort of considered, has long been considered to be the sort of third musical theater capital, just in terms of it's where stage entertainment produces a number of shows. The Lion King has been running there for I forget how long, and I saw Frozen the last time I was there. I saw Dance of the Vampires there. Like they've sort of got a big sort of German language. Uh, Industry there. In the last 10 years or so, Madrid has really started to come online as like a major market for Spanish speakers. It's almost entirely in Spanish, the theater there. And I think it is of particular interest to me in part because there are folks in Spain that are clearly very ambitious for for where they want their shows to go. Like they have international ambitions, essentially. Like they are making original musicals and they are thinking, well, now how do we send them around the world? There's stage entertainment is also there as well. The Lion King and Aladdin have been running there for a long time. You can see things like Mamma Mia and Cinderella there, but then there's one company that is very committed to creating new musicals. They've done it. They've done a Never-Ending Story musical. They've done a very popular musical called The Doctor. I believe that's what it's called, El Médico. And that's been very successful based on an American novel, but that's very popular in Spain. And when I was there, I saw their original musical based on The Pillars of the Earth, the Ken Follett novel. And they, would hope to export that show. One of the reasons they chose that title to adapt was in part because it is internationally a popular, well-known novel. Not just that Spain as a country really likes that novel. There's a former there's a sort of 80s rock star who is also very ambitious about musical theater. He made this kind of wild musical called Malinche that's about um, the uh, the indigenous woman who was served as the translator for Cortez as he was conquering Mexico, and it's sort of a controversial subject to take on in a musical, and it brings in some flamenco in a way that's pretty interesting. And he's sort of created this ring of kind of food and beverage around it. Like you can get tacos, at intermission or a margarita, and then go in and watch the story about the conquest of Mexico. And that show, like he's already doing that show in Mexico City right now to some success, from what I understand, which is also bonkers. But anyway, there's a lot going on in Madrid, and I think it's interesting and exciting, and it may not be to your taste, but it is clearly like super ambitious and worth paying attention to. There's going to be a new musical about Audrey Hepburn, actually, that the Hepburn estate is participating in, and that is premiering in Spanish in November in Madrid.
Well, with such a huge Spanish-speaking population in the United States, I imagine that's a show that you could do in Miami without having to translate it.
I think they hope that that
Yeah.
and it has a sort of Vegas feel as well, and I know that Vegas is on
Oh,
their radar as well.
terrific. And
Yeah.
what's your third country?
My third is the Philippines, Manila. It which is the market that has surprised me the most as I have been kind of exploring. I've yet to make it to Manila, which is it's high on my list, in part because I part of my job now is to kind of follow international musical theater headlines. I've got news alerts set up about stuff, and I kept just seeing all these headlines about here's a brand new musical premiering in Manila this week, and then there's another one, and then there's another one, and I just thought, but there's a lot going on in Manila, and it is musical theater and Broadway in particular is sort of beloved there. And it seems overly simple to say that it's because Lea Salonga became an international star on Broadway and on the West End, but I think that's a big part of it. Lea Salonga is she's Beyonce in Manila essentially, and so they have a real sort of fondness for musical storytelling. They love her. They love Eva Noblezada. They have a real affinity for folks from the Filipino diaspora who go on to succeed. Like there are news stories in Manila outlets about, oh, Ariel Jacobs is in Here Lies Love, and like they really take great pride in watching folks from the Filipino diaspora succeed, particularly on stage in musical theater. And so they have, they did a production of Come From Away. They do Broadway stuff, but there are three or four or five companies that sort of are really regularly making brand new musicals. Often they are jukebox musicals using the music of bands that most of us have never heard of because we're not Filipino, because we don't live in the Philippines. Um, and some of which have been hugely popular. And then there are some also who are creating these brand new musicals with new scores. There's one company in particular that did this show, the hit. I wrote about the Philippines last year or around this time, and the sort of big hit of the summer had been this adaptation of Cyrano de Bergerac that had been reset in in the Philippines in sort of around World War II, just pre-independence, and the way the creator sort of talked about the story's kind of unrequited love and how that fit into sort of the unrequited longing for sort of country and independence and agency in the sort of political landscape at that moment. It sounded so fascinating to me. That musical is in Tagalog, and I don't know how I would understand it, but I would love someone to bring it to a place where I can see it because it sounded great. And I think they just keep making new work, and I think that's really interesting.
So I was going to ask you which country is the most surprising, and you just did. What
That's it. That's the
country,
answer. Yeah.
what country, and I think I know the answer,
Yeah.
which country is the most surprising not to have much musical theater despite otherwise favorable conditions?
I think it's India is the one
Score!
that, yeah, I think it's kind of the one that really it seems like it feels like a total no-brainer, right? Like they are India as a culture loves musical storytelling. Just look at the entire Bollywood industry, right?
Great.
Um, and so it feels like they as a nation are primed for musical theater. And I've written about India, and there are a couple of reasons that it's not hasn't quite taken off. Part of it is that there isn't yet a robust infrastructure there in terms of the kinds of theaters that can accommodate kind of the modern day technical requirements of a Broadway musical. A big fancy new theater opened, I think about 2 years ago, in Mumbai that has now hosted a number of international tours of shows like Mamma Mia and Matilda and Sound of Music and Phantom of the Opera, and that that is starting to create an interest in musical theater. There's not so much a culture. There is a, a huge and rich performance culture in India, obviously, but the Indian folks I talked to, their experience, particularly with children, as children going to the theater was, oh, there's a traveling theater company would come to town and they would go and like sit on the lawn with a picnic and, watch a show. And so that is their idea of theater is a sort of smaller community event that is not getting getting ready, going out to the theater, paying far more money than they are used to paying for a film, for instance. Um, but
It's just adapting somebody's favorite Bollywood into a stage version. One would think,
you would
right?
think, and people have tried. People are trying. There's the most popular Bollywood rom-com of all time is has a title that is abbreviated to DDLJ that has been made into. It started in at La Jolla in San Diego. It was just in, I think, Manchester, one of the UK regions, and now they hope to bring it somewhere. But I saw. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's a Mira Nair film that they adapted
But but
into
even in
musical.
terms of the Indian audiences, I
Yeah,
just think that they'd be lining up to see a movie that they love on
on
stage.
stage.
It sounds like it's not happening yet.
Not yet. It does feel it's going to be a little while, I think, but it does feel like they're starting to think about that as a potential, particularly as the middle class in India. There's all this data about the rising middle class in India. And it's like suddenly people have more disposable wealth and are interested, and they see quite a lot of appeal in enjoying Western entertainment in the manner of Broadway musicals.
So I think, you tell me if you know a more famous one, but I
Hmm.
think the most famous story about Broadway shows translating to international markets is the producer in Japan who said he doesn't understand how Fiddler on the Roof works in other countries because it's so Japanese, right?
Yeah,
That's
I
our
think
our
that's right. That's if you asked me to tell a story about that, that's probably the one I would tell. Yeah.
one. Okay, but let's talk about shows because there are certain shows that really have been to all over,
Hmm.
Phantom of the Opera and Lion King, that really get everywhere. Um,
Hmm.
Shows that really people adopt as having their own values, like Fiddler in Japan. I mean, Fiddler is probably on that list.
Hmm.
Any shows that come to mind that end up feeling Japanese, to so to speak?
Oh, that's interesting. Um, I Nothing that has resonated in the way that Fiddler has that I know of anyway. But let me think on that. Let me think on that. That's an interesting question. Um, I do, let's see. What has been big? I mean, Jekyll and Hyde is very popular in Korea, for instance. And in some ways it feels very Korean, though the Korean market is very led by younger female audiences who, and like shockingly young, like 25 to 35 is their sort of biggest theater going demographic in Seoul. And so that if you have the chance to cast a, you know, hot K-pop star as Jekyll and Hyde, or even better, if you have a show in which you can cast two attractive men as the leads, then that can often do very well in Seoul.
In countries that are not English speaking countries,
Mm.
um, where do English musicals do just fine?
Well, English musicals can do just fine um, in sort of shorter runs
Mhm.
in many countries, any country almost. There is a tradition, like for instance, often in places like Seoul and Tokyo, a show will uh, play first in English in a shorter run. Often it's like the international tour, which is like coming to town for a certain amount of time to sort of lay the groundwork for interest in that property, and then they'll bring it back in the local language. This is what is happening, or what just happened with The Great Gatsby, which is produced by a Korean producer that has been on Broad is on Broadway. They just did it in Seoul. I think that run just finished with people like Matt Doyle in English. They did it in English with the plan of coming back next year with a new Korean cast. And so that is that can happen in any market and often happens in particularly Seoul and Tokyo. Um, Singapore, they tend to do shows in English there. Um, Singapore, the Philippines is in English sometimes, but not always. Um,
What language did they do Into the Woods in?
English, I believe. Yeah.
Cool. So here in Israel, I was really excited that the international tour of Waitress was coming, and
Hmm.
I took a few friends who are musical theater people, not Hebrew speakers,
Hmm.
uh, and then they opened their mouths, and we realized it was a Hebrew translation. And I was
Yeah.
surprised that Waitress was a big enough show to
Yeah.
to translate, but it ran for. I mean, it didn't run every night, but it was a production that lasted quite a while.
Yeah.
Mm.
France also
Oh,
shows in English happen there, in part because the strategy, France, particularly Paris, didn't particularly care for musicals for a very long time. And the guy who was the sort of head programmer at the Châtelet in Paris made a habit of programming musicals. And part of musicals were very sort of snottily looked down on by folks, by Parisians. And so part of the way he tried to kind of elevate them is to do them in the original language in the manner of one does an opera in Italian, written in Italian. And so, oh no, we're going to do a little night music in English because that is the original language. And so there is a tradition of doing theater in English in Paris in a way that there is not in many other places. Stage entertainment in particular is very big on the idea that for a show to succeed locally for any amount of time, it has to be in the local language, which is why they are such a big, why they do so many translations, and they work with Disney and on translating their shows, and they work with, the folks who produced MJ on translating their shows and all that stuff.
Um, oh, that's interesting. MJ
Mm.
in German.
Mm. Yes, not the lyrics. They
Well,
kept
not
the
the lyrics.
lyrics. They
Okay.
kept the lyrics, and because
Not the
there's
music.
always that balance of
Yeah.
because they all know the music and they all know it in English, so it's going to be weird to hear it in German, especially in a show like MJ where there's not a ton of sort of storytelling work being done by those songs. The story is largely being told by the book.
Right. Let's imagine that one of my students had unlimited funds.
Mm.
Um, First of all, I would raise my price. But leaving that
Yes.
aside, where should that person go to enjoy musical theater outside the English speaking world?
Mm. I think it's two of the cities we've talked about already. I think Madrid will have Madrid is, first of all, it's Madrid. It's a great city to visit, but you will probably be surprised if you've never been before, as I was. You walk down the Gran Via and every other marquee, like it's almost like walking down Broadway. Like there's Mamma Mia. Oh, there's The Lion King. Oh, there's Aladdin. And then you can even like go to this sort of weird convention center area just outside the city where I saw a couple of kind of immersive. I saw that Malinche musical there, and then a couple of kind of performance-y theater adjacent kind of events where you could get drinks and food, and then also there's concert a storytelling concert happening. There's a very lively theater going scene there, and I think that's a lot of fun. And then I think Seoul, if you want to go to Asia, I think Seoul is the place to go just for the massive variety of theater that you can get there from the giant productions. Like you could see a big production of a Frank Wildhorn musical that you have never had the opportunity to see because it's only been done in, Asian Vienna, for instance. Or you could also you could kind of wander around the off-Broadway kind of neighborhood there and just see what kind of show you come across. They are making musicals. I had the opportunity to see a number of musicals in development while I was there, and they are making musicals and telling stories in ways that are not American, and they're fascinating for it. It's really fun.
So those of you who do speak a foreign language but haven't done this before, if you see a show that you know really, really well, first of all, it helps you learn the language, right? So I saw Anastasia in Italian, and I saw West Side Story in Spanish, particularly my Spanish was really poor, but my West Side Story is really good.
Mm, mm.
So you don't really need that much Spanish if you know every single word in English. It lets you learn words that you otherwise didn't have access to. It's a great experience that I recommend to anybody who knows a foreign language.
It seems obvious, and you mentioned France. Is
Hmm.
there a drive perhaps to start doing in foreign theater what they do with opera now with the technology, which is to do it in the native language of the production and then put the translation, above on a screen, like or are
That's
you?
that's how they did it.
Oh,
Those productions in France that I was talking about. So that's how they did Little Night Music in English with the super titles. But that is not how they tend to do it. Like for instance, I went to the Lion King when I was in Paris a couple years ago, and they didn't do super titles. I think they had some performances at which English language super titles were offered. And for instance, when I saw that show Malinche in Madrid, that was in Spanish, but they had some super titles up above in English. To be fair, I did love Maybe Happy Ending when I saw it in Seoul. I cried like a baby. I barely speak a word of Korean. Had read a summary beforehand. So I think they are very talented. And because the form and artists who work in the form are still relatively new for many of these countries. They're they make musicals in different ways. Maybe they have a slightly less sophisticated, at least to our eye, idea of musical theater and how it works. So I have found that, a lot of the stuff that I saw in Madrid when I was there, the new stuff that I saw in Madrid was not to my taste. It was placing value on sort of kind of maybe spectacle and maybe historical sweep and kind of show-stopping vocals over story and character. Like I think there are a lot of artists still kind of figuring out all the potential that is there for them, which I think can be really interesting to watch in its own merit.
So I saw a funny thing happen on the way to the forum in Paris.
Oh, did you
And
go? Yeah.
yeah, it was very different
Uh-huh.
because my they were going to do it with Richard Kind, and he dropped out,
Yep.
and they brought a Brit with sort of a wry approach to Pseudolus, which is so
Mm,
different than the usual sort of Borscht Belt kind of approach. And they sprinkled in little French puns here and there to
mm,
sort of keep everybody engaged. There was some improvisation. They noticed I was taking notes, and Monsieur Le Critique, they pointed me out, and it was all in fun. The super titles were terrible. The translations
mm,
to French were just way off. But of course,
mm.
how do you take Sondheim and make it French? It's not an
Yeah.
easy task to do. It was a lot of fun though. I saw it 3 nights in a row. If that
Oh,
tells you,
well.
so I obviously I had a good time.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm interested in training for some of the people. Um, the next Filipino, Jason Robert Brown, right?
Mm,
Um, might that person go to New York? Has there been anybody in the BMI workshop who is,
mm.
as far as you know, who is an up and comer internationally? Do you know?
I don't know of any particular names that are really starting to stand out yet, but I can say that uh, it has been a trend for a little while now. Like Hugh Park, the co-writer of Maybe Happy Ending, was a Korean who came to New York City to study musical theater, and he is not unusual. I have met some Korean creators who, are based in Seoul, but they came to study musical theater at NYU, and then they went back to Seoul, and they're sort of taking what they learned at NYU and using it to create new musicals there. So I think there's particularly in Seoul, where the understanding of the industry is that it can be an industry and that it can be a place to have success and it could be a thriving creative outlet as well. I think there is a real interest in sending folks to the United States to New York to really explore what it looks like here in the US. I know actually a Japanese producer as well, a couple, one of whom they're both from Japan, from Tokyo. One of them stayed in New York and is now producing international work here in the United States. And one of them went back to Japan. She works for Toho now, and in their theater department. And so she has a real understanding of the international market, and particularly the Broadway market, that is
Yeah.
helpful to them there in Japan.
So we're 39 minutes into the interview, and we haven't uttered 2 words yet. West End. We
Hmm.
probably should talk a little bit about
Sure.
London. And the biggest mystery that I have, and I know that you've written about this
Mm.
because I subscribe to your newsletter, is why are tickets so much cheaper in London?
Well, it's a lot of reasons. Um, it is costs are going up all over the world, right? So like it is true across the board that costs are going up, but costs are particularly going up here in the US. It is too simplistic to say that it's because of the unions, but it's not because of the unions, right? Like that is a thing that is a cost that is labor costs are higher here, often much higher than they are in the UK. Um, the let's see, I wrote there are so many that I wrote them down because I knew you were going to ask me this question. Um, there's a there's a like there's so many reasons that the UK scene is sort of more friendly to producing a Broadway musical. The potential in success, the potential is smaller, because everything is so sort of exponentially higher on Broadway. When you succeed, you just rake in the cash in a way that is not possible with a West End hit, for instance. But like there is a tax credit in the UK that uh, helps producers kind of recoup taxes on I think it's up to 45%. It's an absurdly large number of like it's such a good credit. It's such an encouragement for producers to produce here, to produce there in the UK, and such a boon for their costs. Like it keeps costs lower, and that's really appealing to a lot of people. It's starting to become super appealing to folks from the US. They're starting to look really seriously about like Disney is developing The Greatest Showman in one of the regions of the UK. They're not doing it here in the US. They're doing it in I forget where. It's not Manchester, but it's somewhere like that. And that is, I think, a big part of it is that it's a lot cheaper there, even for Disney. That they think it is useful for them to do the show over there. Marketing and advertising is much costs a lot more here in the US. Also, there in terms of ticket costs, there is a taboo around gouging people with high ticket prices, in part because theater going is considered more of a right than a privilege there. It's like sort of woven into the fabric of their lives in a different way than it is in the US. But, there is like someone could charge £1,000 for a ticket to a West End show, but I think the community would react in a I think the condemnation would be so much louder than it would be here in the US that I think that still is keeping, there's a sense of propriety to it as well in terms of how high people want to be seen as charging for ticket prices.
Um, what about homosexuality in countries
Hmm.
where
Cost of
that's
living is lower as well. Sorry, I should mention that the cost of living is lower as well in the UK, and so that is one of the things that keeps wages down. Beg your pardon. Go on.
no, but moving on from England, just in places in the world where homosexuality
Hmm.
is not discussed or not accepted or even illegal,
Hmm.
it's a big part of Broadway. Do you have
Yeah.
any stories about that that might be interesting?
I mean, I think for me, perhaps the most striking, it certainly limits, for instance, the musicals that are going to get done in, Riyadh, for example. They're going to do the Phantom of the Opera, which is A-okay. They're not going to do La Cage, right? But I was very struck by seeing a lot of the new work in Seoul that um, there was a sort of like I mean, one could call it an undercurrent, but it didn't feel particularly very well hidden. Like there was this homoeroticism too, because so many shows are built around two male stars. They often have very intense relationships that feel super gay to me. And so and I think, and that is part of, it kind of falls in line with the interest. There's a kind of a style of kind of manga and anime, story romances. It's called Boys Love. That's basically gay romance. And a lot of the musicals I saw, like I saw this, it was three vampires, all men, and it was so clearly a love triangle, but they never talked about it.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know that the creators would ever have admitted it, but it was so clearly part of the free zone for so many of the uh, folks in the audience, many of whom were these younger women, 25 to 35, who, really enjoyed seeing some pretty boys kind of flirt with each other. Um, it was so interesting to me to just see that it was so clearly present and yet could not be acknowledged fully. And I think that is maybe how it can play out in other societies. I don't, it's
Well,
very
maybe in the
different.
1950s on Broadway, you could write a dissertation about that. So,
Right. Yeah.
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 All right, we're going to do something very bold now that I didn't
Oh,
tell you we were going to do.
Oh
but you're a
gosh.
master interviewer, so you'll be good at this, which is I'm going
Okay.
to do a reverse interview.
Oh
I
goodness.
want you to ask a question that one of my students can answer about their experience with international Broadway.
Oh, okay. Um, uh, what what show have you seen in a language that is not your native language?
Okay, somebody want to raise their hand? And of course, then tell us
And
about
then what did you think of it? Yes, of course.
Yeah, I saw a small musical about Edith Piaf when I went to Paris,
Oh, uh-huh.
which was wonderful. Tiny little theater, probably 200, 300 seats.
Hmm.
Uh, and it was in French with English super titles above
Okay,
the
yeah.
stage. But it was wonderful. It was really nice to see um, theater that, I mean, it felt very similar to things that we have in the States. I mean, it was very
Yeah.
presented in a very similar way to like an off-Broadway show.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful. It was really a lot of fun to experience that. And because it was in two languages, the audience was kind of a mix. Like you could definitely tell that
Hmm.
there were Parisians there, but there were also tourists there as
Yeah.
well. It's really a fun environment.
Yeah. Cool.
You got another one, Gordon?
Is there a um is there a foreign film or a foreign story that you think would make a very good musical?
Oh, good. Good question.
And you did mention Korea and you mentioned Parasite, and I think
Hmm.
Parasite would be really interesting on stage. I think there's definitely potential there, especially because you've
Yeah,
got
Oh,
different generations, so you could have potentially different styles of music.
You and I have both seen Come From Away in Gander.
we sure did.
Uh,
It was
tell
really
me,
fun. You went last summer, yeah? I went this most recent summer, yeah.
they're making it I think if
They are.
they're
Yes, they are.
like a destination for people to just go and experience. It's going to be
Yep.
their biggest tourist thing in their city for a very long time. So what was it like for you?
I had a great time. I don't know when I would ever go to Newfoundland in any other capacity, and so I'm so glad I got the opportunity. And it is a musical that I knew. You know, I've seen it on Broadway. I've seen the Apple TV film. Um, but it has a kind of richness that it would not otherwise have. The production was great. There were a couple of people from from the original Broadway cast in it. There were a couple of kind of well-known local performers there. There was one guy from New York and a couple folks from Toronto. They're there for the summer. They only do it for the summer, but it is such a different experience to watch that show and see, you meet, I think the first character who speaks, I think, is the mayor. And then you walk down to the Legionnaires Club where they do the big scene where they drink and they kiss the fish and they've got the boater hats on. And then I went to that Legionnaires Club and met that mayor who gave me a shot of that local rum that is depicted in the show. Like, to be able to go to the places and in many cases meet the people that you just saw on stage is
Where there was a miracle, right?
where
I mean,
yeah,
it's
there
not
it's
just
it's
that it's a
amazing.
place that it happened.
Yeah,
It's a holy place.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a wonderful time and I am delighted to see. I love writing about the ways that theater can be not just sort of, a cultural good, but also an economic good. And it is the kind of bringing tourism. The weekend I was there, all the hotels were packed full, and because of that show, and because the area's version of the Special Olympics were happening in near Gander as well. And so you couldn't get a hotel room. The restaurants were packed, all that stuff. Like you could see.
On
Mhm.
9/11.
Yeah, uh-huh, yeah.
Tell me about plays versus musicals. Would
Hmm.
plays translate well, or it sounds like we're talking mostly about musicals.
Yeah, it's mostly musicals that travel. There are for a minute, I really thought we were going to start to see more plays go around the world. War Horse did pretty well around the world. Plays that have a kind of um, rich visual language do really well. So like Warhorse did well. There was the play of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime that was staged in a very interesting way, and so that was taken around the world. And Harry Potter is doing well enough, because it's Harry Potter. It will be interesting to me to see if the Stranger Things play has the kind of international life they that something like Harry Potter does. I don't think it will technically, but I'm sure they would love. I'm sure they would love it if it did. And that has that's a big elaborate visual spectacle, and so I think they hope that maybe it might find some purchase somewhere around the world.
What do you think?
Me,
Do
what
you
do I
think
think? I do. I don't know that Stranger Things is popular enough. I'm not sure it's popular enough here in the US, much less anywhere else. Like it's not doing great here on Broadway. So I'm not sure it's going to work.
I read last year that The Mousetrap was coming to Broadway, the longest running show on the
Hmm.
planet, right? And that I read this several times last year and
Hmm.
it never got here. You know anything, Gordon?
No, no. I
No.
did also I remember them talking about it and then talk
Yeah.
fades. That's a thing
Yeah,
that happens
exactly.
occasionally.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. All right.
I'm actually going to be speaking to the rights holders of the Mousetrap fairly soon. I'll ask him about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
with Ellen?
Yeah, well, just going back when I thought about some more, maybe Slumdog Millionaire, and there could be
They're working on it.
and maybe it wasn't your top three, but you didn't mention anything in South America at all. And that's, even though it's Spanish speaking, there's a different take on that.
Yeah.
So I was
Um,
wondering if you had any particular
Sao
info.
Paulo is a big musical theater town, and it is on my that is very high on my list of places that I need to get to is Sao Paulo. I think they're doing some interesting stuff. As far as I can tell, there is not a particularly rich original work scene there. There's some jukebox musicals that seem to happen there on and off, but it's largely focused on, like there was that production of Wicked in Sao Paulo that it was not a replica of the Broadway production. They did these amazing flying effects, and it was popular enough that has been back
Now,
has been
Jaques
back more than once.
Jaques is interested both in original work and in what happens with
Yeah.
American musicals that travel, how subsidies affect the economics
Hmm.
of Broadway or musical theater in various countries. Do you want to address that?
Sure. I think it is largely it's the what first comes to mind is the sort of government support for the South Korean musical theater industry. Like it has such a the government is putting real money behind the development of musicals and the export of those musicals. I mean, the reason I ended up in Seoul last summer was that I was invited to speak as part of a conference that is hosted by kind of the government office for musical theater because there is one, and they funded this conference. They like got people from all over the world to come see what was being made in South Korea. They take musicals that they hope could have some legs around the world, and they do a showcase in Tokyo. They do a showcase in London. They do a showcase in New York. I'm going to go to their showcase in November here in New York. So that has, I think, had a real effect on the visibility of the Korean musical theater scene. And then, there is in Europe, of course, there's a kind of rich tradition of the subsidized theater, much of which is like can be characterized or perhaps stereotyped as like overly serious and very dramatic, but often sort of edgy and experimental in interesting ways. There's an interesting Australian director who's based in Berlin right now named Barry Kosky, who has directed a series of musicals in Berlin with the to our eyes, to our American eyes, with the sort of backing of the massive coffers of the arts subsidies of Germany. And so for instance, he did a staging of Fiddler on the Roof. You probably know about this, David, that I think it had like a cast of 150, like just an absurd number of people that he could afford because he had both really like the creative freedom to do that and also the unlimited budget that usually does not come along with commercial projects here in the United States. Um, and so he has made a number of musicals that kind of deviate from what we might consider the norm of the staging, because he had the freedom to do that. And now he, as a director, is interested in exploring what he can do in the commercial, international, Broadway scene. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how his aesthetic, which is so defined by the resources and the freedom of that sort of European subsidized scene, how that translates into what we get from him when we see a show of his on Broadway, for instance. He's working on a musical adaptation of Yentl right now, for example. So, like, will that come together? Who can say?
Well, Yentl was a musical movie, but I guess it's
True.
new
Yeah.
interpretation. It is a science fiction fantasy, the concept of a ministry of musical theater.
Right.
God
Right.
willing,
I know.
right?
Yeah.
What a
If
fantasy.
only.
If only.
What do you know about the musical scene in Israel?
I think
Either.
David is the person to speak about that.
Oh, okay. I thought, David,
Yeah.
you.
I don't know a ton. Yeah.
In Jerusalem, here in Jerusalem, which is where I am
Yeah.
right now, there is a amateur theater scene whose best work is about the level of a good high school musical, which can be very good, right? Tel Aviv has outstanding professional productions. The ones in Jerusalem are generally in English, not always. The ones in Tel Aviv are generally in Hebrew, not always. But pretty good. So I enjoy it. So
Do they have any original
I just
musicals
the
that have
crowd going
traveled?
singing here. Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying, do they have any original Israeli musicals that have traveled outside of Israel?
They do have some original Israeli musicals. I don't know if they have traveled. Let us give a happy Broadway Maven thank you to Gordon. Gordon, if you put your link in the chat again, I
Yep.
really
Sure.
recommend subscribing to Jaques. You'll just learn lots of the kinds of things um, that you learned tonight. And you want to
Thanks,
sum up?
everyone. Thanks for inviting me, David. This was fun.